Chapter 7, Parts 1-2. Chapter 7, Chaotic Complications. Part 1, Victory Bay, Cronus. The Lord Inquisitor was something else, all right. Commissar Weber didn't know what they fed and taught baby Inquisitors in their scholars, but it had to be the good stuff. There was no other way to explain how someone as young as him managed to pull of what their resident Inquisitor did in just a few short days. Not to mention that he even survived it more or less intact. The way he wasn't affected by the little blank was astounding as well. Lieutenant Groban, sort out working parties to see to our dead. Lieutenant Connor, get your medicaes on the wounded yesterday. Weber barked orders to get his troopers moving. They were good people, especially for soldiers of a PDF regiment from a messed-up place like Cronus. When it mattered, they didn't flinch and went after the Xeno for all they were worth, something the Commissar could only approve of. He knew very well that many of his colleagues who arrived with General Alexander weren't so lucky with their own regiments. The only shadows staining his victory mood were the mechanical Xeno, those so-called Necrons milling around, and the Blood Ravens, which should have been an unthinkable treason just a month ago. Now, after seeing firsthand the Emperor's Angels of Death shooting at loyal guardsmen and PDF troopers because something as inane as conflicting orders, Weber glanced at the back of the huge Astartes, who went to speak with the Inquisitor, and bristled. It simply wasn't right. He took a few deep breaths, doing his best to ignore the stench, and forced himself to calm down. The last thing anyone needed was for a Commissar of all people to lose his temper and do something regrettable. Still, he could dream of the Inquisition falling like the wrath of the Emperor himself upon everyone who had anything to do with the utter mess on Cronus, human and Xeno alike. Weber just got everyone working on dealing with the battle's aftermath when the Inquisitor emerged from the back of the Chimera. The Commissar's smile wavered when he saw the blank lass clutching Vale's side with one thin hand while she was busy munching on an opened field ration. Even at a distance, simply seeing the child was most unnerving experience, even before her wide-open eyes stared blankly at him. Weber's smile froze on his face when the Inquisitor saw him and waved him to approach. He shook himself. He was a Commissar for the Emperor's sake. He wasn't going to run from a little girl who, when all was said and done, was an asset for the Imperium. Even if she made his skin crawl and feel like running as far away from her might be for the best. "Inquisitor, how can I be of service?" Weber was proud that he kept his voice steady. Without being pumped with adrenaline and righteous anger at the Xenos, coming anywhere close to the brat was anything but easy. "Commissar Weber, do us all a favor and find someone reliable to look after the child." Vale ruffed the blank's short hair as if it was the most natural thing in the world, something that made the Commissar's appreciation of the man rise up another notch. To think he could handle her proximity and touch without flinching, it was simply incredible. "I'll see to it personally, my Lord Inquisitor," Weber declared, and he was proud his voice rang with conviction. If the Inquisitor could force himself to tolerate the little blank, even her touch, he could do nothing less. He had an example to follow. "Hi there." Weber waved at the girl, trying to be as friendly as he could. For better or worse, she paid him no attention and continued to munch on her meal. "Huh, were those waffles?" "Good, I'm leaving her in your capable hands, Commissar. I'll be back to check on her once my meeting with the General is over. Take care." The Inquisitor offered Weber a salute, and the Commissar hurried to return it. Weber's determination took a nosedive once Vale managed to coax the blank to let him go and offered him her hand. Touching her was like handling a live power line. It was all Weber could do not to push her away and jump as far from the girl as he could. He had to keep repeating in his head that this wasn't her fault and that she wasn't going to hurt him or worse. That in fact, while in his presence, he was as safe he could be from chaos as one could get unless there was a genuine Emperor-blessed saint nearby. Era's Badlands, Cronus. A small convoy of vehicles drove through the baked hell that was the Era's Badlands. Every single machine was properly sanctified and blessed in the name of the four gods and repainted with blood and all kinds of holy symbols. The leading Chimera, which was faithfully liberated from the servants of the Golden Corpse, proudly wore the torso of a sacrifice as a hood ornament, and liberally sprayed blood when the vehicle drove through any bump in what passed for roads in this forgotten place. I have fond memories from this place. Eliphas mussed from his seat on top of an ancient rhino transport that drove in the center of the convoy. It was over there I gutted couple of the Gilliman's boys. He smiled in a fond memory and pointed at a small dusty hill in the distance. I even kept their skulls until the last Black Crusade. He continued, those were good times. I don't care what you skull fetishists do to entertain yourselves nowadays, much less what you did 10,000 years ago. That unpleasant screech came from the Chaos Sorcerer ridding beside Chaos Champion. Eliphas narrowed his eyes at the follower of Tzeentch, while the fingers of his right hand closed around the hilt of his good old Crozius. He had to remind himself that bashing in the skull of the sorcerer right now would be counterproductive, no matter how much satisfying it would be. Perhaps once the ritual was done. We're almost there anyway. Eliphas pointed at the distance to the east. Over there. Can you feel it, sorcerer? He hungers for blood. He can sense how the corpse worshippers and the Eldar are slaughtering each other. Those blue fools too, but who cared about them? The Prince of Pleasure would reward us for every soul stone we sacrificed to him. The sorcerer nodded in agreement. The Chaos Champion looked back at the transports driving behind his ride and smiled in approval. He could see the faces of many eager sacrifices who had been busy carving the signs of their devotion in their own flesh and that of their children. While he usually preferred to spill the blood of the unbelievers and then feed their souls to the gods, he had to admit that there were times when there was no substitute to blood and lives willingly sacrificed for the faith. This was going to work beautifully, he was sure of it. Part 2. Eris Badlands. Cronus. All the warning they got was a brief wave of static before reality distorted and a massive green form materialized in front of the convoy in a shower of purple lighting. The leading vehicle slammed into the newcomer without even attempting to slow down, resulting in an almighty crash and screech of twisting metal. Feet slammed into brake pedals and the convoy came to a sudden jerky stop. Tracks and tires dug deep into the baked ground, and the sudden stop covered the whole convoy in a thick cloud of dust. Even as screams of outrage and vile curses came from the Chaos worshippers, a deep amused chuckle silenced them all. I'm not that easy to kill, hummies. Eliphas's eyes narrowed to slits. Despite the dust, he could clearly see the source of the interruption. That sorry excuse for a mushroom dared interrupt the god's work. He was going to feed his soul to Khorne after. The huge orc tore through the chimera he crashed into with a wicked-looking power claw attached to his right hand, which was properly covered in dried blood. His other hand ended up with a tri-barreled weapon that was sliced nearly in two. No one sane would have used it, but of course that meant nothing for the dumb brute. Said brute being a Khorne-cursed orc, the damned weapon worked too, even if it shouldn't have. The Chaos Champion moved much faster than even a transhuman had any right to and jumped clear off the rhino with the sorcerer vaulting off just a heartbeat later. They got off just in time too, because a moment later a crack grenade fell through an open hatch and turned the vehicle's interior into an inferno. Shards of glowing metal tore through the armor, barely missing the two Astartes. Two more grenades fell through the air behind the rhino and detonated, disintegrating a pair of the transports bearing sacrifices. Chunks of flesh and blood rained upon the dusty ground, only for the crimson fluid to be immediately absorbed without a trace. Damn you, Eliphas roared, took his Crozius in hand and charged the orc, determined to tear the offending greenskin limb from limb. The brute chuckled, grabbed the caved-in chimera, heaved as he picked it up, and threw it at the next vehicle in the convoy, crushing their crew. The sorcerer found his footing and sent a stream of fire at the greenskin, who merely shrugged it off as if it was nothing, and met Eliphas's charge with a happy laugh. The Crozius hummed with the promise of ruin in Eliphas's hand as he skid to a stop, his feed digging small trenches in the soil. He managed to halt his progress just in time to avoid a backhand strike from the greenskin's grenade launcher, which left the beast open for a devastating strike that should have torn off its lower jaw. Instead, the blessed weapon and its disruptor field merely dented the crude metal and rang the orc's head like a gong. The brute took half a step back, paying no attention to the cultists and a handful of blessed Astartes, who had finally pilled out of their vehicles and opened fire at him, and swung his power claw at the Chaos Champion. Eliphas jumped back, avoiding the crude claws cracking with energy, and glared murderously at the orc. "Your suffering will be legendary, beast," the champion promised darkly. "Do you have any idea what you just did, you damned brute?" "You talk too much." Gorgut smirked, took another swipe at Eliphas, forcing him to move back to avoid it, and pointed his grenade launcher at the Chaos Champion, all the while ignoring lasbolts and bolter round glancing off, or blowing chunks from his crude armor. Eliphas swore as he jumped back as far away as his enhanced body and power armor could bring him while clawing for his bolt pistol. A fragmentation grenade detonated where he stood just a moment ago, throwing a geyser of dirt in the air and further obscuring the orc. A second one blew closer to the Chaos Champion, rattling his teeth, and then a third one landed just in front of him. The following explosion sent searing shards glancing off and even digging into his armor, and the shockwave was enough to lift him off his feet and throw him away. An explosion that would have pulverized an ordinary human merely stunned and singed the Chaos Champion. He had the blessing of Khorne. He wasn't going to die so easily. He roared in fury and jumped on his feet, ignoring the aches caused by the grenades, and ran back into the fray. Finally, the demon engines at the back of the convoy had entered the fray, which was admittedly a mixed blessing in this case. The demon-possessed dreadnoughts moved past the halted column, spewing flames, cannon shells, and bolter fire in the orc's general direction. The brute himself had wadded into the cultists and cut to pieces a squad of guardsmen who had seen the light of the gods. When Eliphas saw him again, the orc was busy tangling with the sorcerer and a pair of Astartes in close quarters. The demon engines put a stop to that in a hurry. 4 shells blew up a chimera, tore 2 of the Astartes to bloody chunks, and left the sorcerer writhing on the ground, leaking blood from the stumps of his legs. The beast didn't emerge unscratched. The detonations threw it off its feet, tore off the left side of its face and the crude bionic eye off its socket, and finally demolished the grenade launcher, complete with the arm up to the shoulder. Not to mention, they caved the left side of its armor and torso. Any natural creature would have been stopped by this much punishment and died in agony. That green mushroom with delusions of grandeur. It laughed and got up on unsteady feet just in time for Eliphas to fall upon it and begin smashing it with his blessed Crozius. Weakened armor cracked and fell apart under the disruptor field, green flesh tore in chunks of bloody gore, a heavy bolter burst, caught the brute in the side, and it shook under the impacts before the pile of shot-up scrap on its back glowed, discharging green and purple arcs of energy. Prudently, Eliphas jumped away, and it was just in time too. Reality twisted so much it was painful to look at, and the orc disappeared with a crack of displaced air that rushed to fill up the void. The Chaos Champion roared in frustration at being denied his kill. He looked wildly around, saw the still twitching form of the sorcerer, and walked toward him, bloodthirsty Crozweem in hand. The ritual was ruined now. They needed more willing sacrifices than they had at hand. He needed to hit and bleed someone, before returning to get his hands on more cultists and a larger force for an escort. Failure was not an option. The gods made that crystal clear. The sorcerer attempted to summon the warp to protect himself, raising an arm that glowed with power. Eliphas shot the Winnie bastard in the palm, blowing the hand to tiny bloody chunks. At least Khorne should be mollified by the bloodletting. Before the sorcerer could do something else, the champion shot off the sorcerer's other hand as well, and then began smashing him with his blessed mace until there was nothing but bloody paste left, which was in turn greedily drunk by the ground below his feet. While this as an unmitigated disaster, the sorry bastard most likely to try stab him in the back was now very dead, so hopefully it wasn't all bad, Eliphas hoped. Chapter 7, Parts 3 out and 4. Chapter 7, Part 3, Victory Bay, Cronus. 5 hours after the mess of a battle, Victory Bay was more or less secure. Heavily armed patrols prowled the streets. Sharp-eyed marksmen warily watched the city from positions high up on various tall buildings, while thousands of guardsmen were busy dealing with the direct aftermath. There were wounded to tend, dead to bury, equipment to retrieve and repair, xenobodies to burn, and xenogear to either destroy or contain for evaluation and later disposal by either the Mechanicus or Inquisition. It was a grim, inglorious affair, but still a vital one. Besides, it was still better than being anywhere near the blank lass. It was a pity that looking after her couldn't be used as a proper punishment detail. Commissar Weber wasn't about to entrust her to anyone but the most reliable soldiers under his command, especially after her previous minders apparently abandoned her before the fighting broke out. He certainly wouldn't want to explain to the Lord Inquisitor how the guard managed to misplace the kid again. The very idea felt dirty, and not just because of what the Inquisition could do to you if you displeased one of their members. "Commissar Weber, sir. Orders from command. You're summoned to the General's CP for a meeting," a nearby Vox operator announced, breaking Weber's train of thought. "I'll be there momentarily, Specialist. Do inform the Lieutenant of my location." He confirmed receiving the summons, looked around for anything out of place beyond the obvious, and headed to a group of chimeras waiting nearby. Right now, General Alexander flew his flag over a freshly dropped prefabricated HQ complex on the other side of the city. "Sergeant, I need transport to the General's HQ," Weber told the steel-eyed vehicle commander, who had the top hatch opened and was looking around for any sign of trouble. "We'll get you there ASAP, Commissar," the NCO answered with a stiff salute. "I'm glad to hear it." Weber waited for the assault ramp to open and climbed inside, nodding to the troopers sitting bored out of their minds while waiting for anything to go wrong so they could deal with it. "Don't get up on my account." The commissar waved them back along with their hasty attempts to salute and get to attention, a hard feat within the cramped interior of the APC. The ramp closed behind him and the Chimera's engine roared to life before the armored vehicle rumbled on. In the red lights illuminating the troop compartment, Weber could see how young and uncomfortable the soldiers appeared. This was another new batch drawn from the PDF then. Proper guardsmen had an air about them that was completely missing with this unit. It was a stark contrast, especially when comparing these boys and girls with General Alexander's regiments, who were entirely composed of veterans before arriving at Cronus. Obviously, the green PDF troops simply couldn't compare, and while today proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that many of them had their hearts in the right place, their inexperience did contribute to the ease with which the Xeno slaughtered so many of them. Weber slowly took a deep breath, keeping his face a blank mask. He wasn't being fair to the PDF, especially those who fought under his command today. They did their best, and it wasn't like most guard units could offer a much better showing against something like the never-sufficiently damned Eldar. On the bright side, inside the Chimera, he could barely smell the stench of gore and burning bodies, something that might persist for a few days, yet barring a nice rain to wash the city. 30 minutes and 5 checkpoints later, the APC parked just outside a small park surrounded by a tall stone fence with towers at the corners topped by winged statues of saints. The General's CP was deployed inside and surrounded by rings of defenses. "You can get back to your post now, Sergeant. I'll procure transport back to the regiment when the meeting is over," Weber told the NCO. With the veteran around, the inexperienced soldiers might just live long enough to become proper guardsmen. While passing through more security, which the commissar naturally approved of, he became convinced that General Alexander had chosen this area for a CP after the battle due to the lack of stench and still burning buildings in the general vicinity. Well, that and the fact that this part of the city was away from the main avenues leading to the factories on the outskirts of the city, and thus kept the HQ away from the primary worker congestions as people went to and back from work. That last one was important because, commissar or not, with parts of the city closed for traffic due to battle damage, Weber's transport had to wait and detour more than a few times on the way here. Then there were the security concerns caused by a large group of locals passing by on regular intervals, so this was likely for the best. Besides, the park was a nice change after the blood-soaked battlefield that was the far side of the city. Weber went past one last security check and found himself in a familiar, standard-sized briefing room nested to the left side of the HQ. The pair of tall mechanical Xeno, glowing with ominous green light, was very much not standard for a meeting of loyal sons and daughters of the Empire, no matter who they were, though the commissar didn't have any particular qualms about the other people cramped inside. His eyes shone with approval when he saw the Lord Inquisitor looking warily at the Xeno, who they had to work with for the time being. There was likely going to be hell to pay when reinforcements arrived, and hopefully it would be Imperial ones that got to Cronus first, because otherwise, well, it would be a good day to die for the Emperor and humanity. Commissar, General Alexander nodded sharply when he saw Weber enter. We're now all here, so let's begin. Magos, Scipio, row 11, please report the status of our vehicle park. As far as he knew, this one particular Magus was on the junior side. There was no one more senior present. Weber did hear that the Mechanicus did suffer some significant casualties fighting to protect the industrial districts, which were targeted by Eldar raiding parties. So the senior adepts were either dead or too damaged to be present for this. Armored ground element, 30% irrecoverable casualties, 23% recoverable casualties within the next 24 hours, 12% recoverable casualties within the next 72 hours, 8% recoverable casualties within the next standard week. Aeronautica assets, 60% irrecoverable casualties, 10% recoverable casualties within the next 24 hours, 20% recoverable casualties within the next 72 hours, 10% recoverable casualties within the next standard week. Light ground elements, 32% irrecoverable casualties. Those numbers weren't good. For all intents and purposes, their aerospace assets were gutted, and the armored units, which offered the Guard the bulk of its firepower, not to mention maneuver formations, had taken significant punishment. While not unexpected, perhaps even better than they might have been otherwise, the casualties were severe, close to crippling as far as offensive operations went. If it wasn't for the unpleasant, borderline heretical alliance with the Xeno, the numbers would have been at least an order of magnitude worse, and at that point, the necessary assault upon the Chaos positions would turn into an unmitigated butchery. Needing the aid of Xenos to protect an Imperial world, it was infuriating and frustrating in the extreme. How the Inquisitor managed to swing that, how the idea even crossed the man's mind, Weber would never know. And unfortunately, the higher authority would not look favorably upon the events on Cronus, no matter the outcome. Still, they did the Emperor's work this day, and they will be doing it in the days to come. If they had to pay the ultimate price for it, just so the rest of the Imperium could be sure there was no taint, spiritual, mental, or literal, well, those things happened. 33,000 guardsmen dead from the fighting within Victory Bay itself, to be added to the death toll from the lost infantry regiments, which fell slowing down the Tau armored advance, and at least twice more wounded. With the Eldar being extremely deadly, engagements against them tended to produce more dead and less wounded compared to facing a more conventional foe, especially when routs and losing whole units weren't a factor. That still meant at least 30,000 or so wounded soldiers who would be out of action for the foreseeable future, who were going to be missed during the assault on the Deimos Peninsula. In practice, this means we won't be able to launch an assault against the Chaos forces on Cronus for at least 24 hours, preferably 72, General Alexander said after the butcher's bill was clear to everyone. Unfortunately, time is working against us. With every passing moment, the heretics become stronger due to reinforcements coming through a warp portal they have active at the far end of the Deimos Peninsula, which is our primary target. If we wait too long, they will either have the sheer numbers to overwhelm us, or will corrupt this world beyond salvaging, and thus doom us all. Either of those outcomes is unacceptable. General Alexander thundered and slammed a fist onto the tactical table in the middle of the room. Within 36 hours, we will have replenished and repaired units lost during today's battle. The Xeno spoke in its eerie mechanical voice. Various special units will be available for the assault, including equipment to mitigate transdimensional bleed-through. We recommend launching a joint assault 36 hours from now, and we agree that the primary target is neutralizing the dimensional breach threatening this world. Ripples of unease washed over the gathered Imperials, while the machines showed no sign that they noticed or cared about it. 36 hours is an acceptable time frame. General Alexander grudgingly agreed after staring at the Inquisitor and waiting for Lord Vale's nod of approval. We need a plan for the operation. What assets can you bring to the table? He asked the Xeno. Part 4. General Alexander's HQ, Victory Bay. Cronus. The list of assets the Necrons promised for Operation Nemesis, the cleansing of the Deimos Peninsula, was both eye-opening and unsettling. While in raw numbers they were inferior to the Imperial contribution, in practice it was large enough force to give the surviving Guard and Astartes units on Cronus run for their money. Obviously, said force wasn't everything these Xenos had on the planet, just the already active portion minus what they felt comfortable of leaving to protect their facilities. Those reinforcements, General Alexander and the Inquisition requested better arrive soon. Otherwise, the planet might either find itself with new owners of blasted to bits by the Navy when it deigned to appear in force, Weber thought. Drone swarms offered us a good picture of the enemy's defenses, the Xeno said. It waved a metal hand and a crisp green hologram materialized above the tactical table. The projection was rather bland and stylized, however that was certainly better than live feed from a chaos-infested area. Best case scenario about that operation, everyone who lived through it would be looked hard and long by the Inquisition and Ecclesiarchy. Worst case, well, it was a one-way mission, no matter who killed you, with any survivors receiving the Emperor's mercy just in case. Needless to say, anyone going there would be wearing a fully environmentally sealed armors for all the good it was going to do. At least there was no shortage of those, in part thanks to the industrial capacity of Victory Bay, augmenting what the general's regiments brought with themselves. At this point, the Xeno was saying, the enemy is still in the process of setting up outer perimeter defenses. We're detecting multiple locations with increased transdimensional bleed-through beyond the portal. Drone observation points at energy discharges fueled by sacrifices, which we estimate are going to be deadly for you squishies. In this case, the recommendation is that those areas are purged with indirect fire if practical, close assault by heavy infantry if not, both ours and your Astartes. 2 rings of 6 blinking purple pints appeared on the map, looking like pulsing tumors. We'll need more data on those locations. The Astartes, often seen with Inquisitor Vale, spoke after silently observing the meeting so far. We'll provide a filtered recording, live feed if necessary, though viewing it by you humans will be dangerous. The Xeno stated with what might have been droll sarcasm. Was the thing capable of something like that? Continuing, there are 4 locations of concentrated transdimensional energies on the main roads leading to the targets. Those are staging grounds for extra-dimensional entities. Sacrificing altars and pools of blood apparently help them remain stable in our dimension, while their numbers increase enough for a decisive action, we believe. With those words, 4 blinking red circles appeared on the map. Further, there are artillery positions at these points. The Xeno continued and triangular symbols appeared on multiple locations, generally hills which would offer better range and firing lanes. Those need to be silenced before we can launch a proper armored assault in order to kick the door to the portal open. Colonel Rovell concluded, My crews will appreciate if any anti-tank infantry infestations are removed in front our advance. We don't have enough armored units to waste them against such opposition. In 12 hours, we'll have units disrupting the construction of the enemy's outer defenses, the Xeno said. We'll be using our teleportation technology to insert in strike units, which will hunt down for artillery and heavy infantry as well. Our assault marines and light units will be ideal for this part of the operation, Captain Thule added. We'll have the capacity to deep strike Terminator and Dreadnought units for headhunter missions. However, first we'll have to confirm that our armor and ward can protect us from the suspected warp discharges. If not, they have to be neutralized first. Can't you just insert a unit at the portal and neutralize it, thus buying us time for a better prepared and methodical assault? There is too much transdimensional interference, and the area of effect is slowly increasing. At projected rates, it will cover the whole peninsula within 2 weeks, while we can protect our units, which will take part into the assault, from its corrupting effect. A long-range teleportation is out of the question. The same goes for air or orbital strikes, the Xeno explained. That damn warp dome above the portal, the Lord Inquisitor grumbled. We'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. Inquisitor Vale is right. General Alexander nodded grimly. Make no mistake, this is going to be a tough, bloody fight against some of the nastiest things this galaxy has had the misfortune to ever see. He glared at the assembled people. That said, we will cleanse this infestation from the face of Cronus in the Emperor's name, before it can kill us all or worse. As he said that, the general made the sign of the Aquila, and every single Imperial, even the Mechanicus adepts, followed suit. The Xeno. They simply looked around with what might have been curiosity. Regarding morale, dealing with possible corruption and contamination, while everyone committed to the operation should be on the lookout, dealing with said dangers will be the primary responsibility of the commissars, junior officers, and the ecclesiarchy cadre we either brought with us or can draw on locally. After the battle, everyone who takes part will be quarantined until a determination on their status could be done by proper authorities. Which meant the reinforcements, the Inquisition in particular. Well, that couldn't be helped. "We'll do our part, sir," Weber spoke aloud in a voice leaving no doubt about his conviction, a sentiment echoed by his fellow commissars among the gathered officers. "I expect nothing less," General Alexander said before changing the topic. "We can't count on the enemy sitting behind their defenses and waiting for us to come for them. We need to be on the lookout for either infiltration and sabotage attempts, or perhaps even an all-out assault on our own positions. Further, we'll need to establish forward operation bases and supply dumps closer to the target zone in order to make our logistics easier during Operation Nemesis. In particular, that is one of the constraints delaying the launch of the assault. Some of the areas between us and the Deimos Peninsula are currently no man's land, which needs to be secured. Air and orbital support is and will be available in those areas." The Xeno motioned at the map and it shifted, zooming out, changing into a crisp orbital image, which had the Deimos Peninsula hazed out, likely as a precaution. Multiple amber bands superimposed themselves between the target area and Victory Bay, showing zones complete with flight time for air assets, Aeronautica, Astartes and Necron alike. That was going to be useful information, yet it was disturbing, because as far as Weber could determine, the flight times for the Imperial fighters and bombers were about right. Any Xeno having this much data about the Imperial war machine was always an unpleasant proposition. Then again, some of the most dangerous of humanity's foes knew the Guard and Astartes capabilities almost as well as the Guard regiments and Astartes chapters themselves. However, Weber didn't have to like that fact, damn it. Let us not forger that while all those details and smaller components of Operation Nemesis are vital, they are only supporting elements which will allow us to achieve our primary objective. The Lord Inquisitor got the meeting back on track. "The warp portal." General Alexander's mouth twisted in distaste. "Precisely. To put it bluntly, if we fail to seal it, we're all fucked, both literally and figuratively," Inquisitor Vale stated. He looked at the Astartes looming beside him. "Options, Antaeus?" "Depending on the portal, direct application of firepower upon whatever supports it might be enough." The Astartes grimaced. "Or it might do nothing at all. I can't say for certain before seeing the damn thing myself. We'll provide relevant long-range images. If we can secure the immediate area and keep enemy reinforcements coming through contained, we should be able to build the necessary infrastructure to strengthen real space in the area, weaken the breach, and eventually seal it. However, doing so will take time and resources, which we might not necessarily have." The Xeno explained. The implications of the Necrons having such capabilities were staggering, and needless to say, Weber was sure that the Mechanicus adepts would be drooling at the idea of having such tech if it could be properly developed by humans. If he was even more cynical, and if he was suicidal, the commissar might have wondered, perhaps even aloud, if some of the machine god disciples might not care about the origin of such technology if they could get their mechadendrites on them. Chapter 7, Parts 5 and 6. Chapter 7, Chaotic Complications. Part 5, General Alexander's HQ, Victory Bay, Cronus. With a core of a plan established, the meeting dissolved with a promise for another one tomorrow evening to hash out the details after we all had both a better idea of what we would have available beyond Mechanicus estimations, and a time to actually plan the various stages of the overall plan. Meanwhile, I felt compelled to prod our Xeno allies for information. "I must ask for details about the warp-dampening technology you mentioned." I walked to the Necrons, who were slowly making their way to the exit, where they could safely teleport away, without potentially damaging the command center. The tall, ominous-looking robot, who was the Xeno representative today, towered above me, its hunched head nearly touching the ceiling, which was built with tall Astartes in mind. Ask. It rumbled without a hint of emotion. I'll be blunt. Can we have the technology, and if prudent, any available older schematics for versions which might be easier to produce with a crippled industrial base? Ours hasn't been in the best of shapes for about 10,000 years or so, I asked, doing my best to keep my voice professional. Needless to say, this could get me shot, either by an infuriate cogboy or girl, whoever arrived at the rescue. Either that, or if my insane request panned out, I would be thrown on the deep end having to deal with politics. But that would be all right. It would mean I would have survived the fighting yet to come on Cronus, and the immediate fallout. The Necron simply stared at me with its glowing green eyes as if judging my worth and that of my request. There was something deep inside that recoiled and bristled at the very thought of a Xeno, any Xeno, daring to do something like this. Then there was the feeling of dozens of eyes staring at me with shock and not a little bit of anger. What the hell was I thinking? Well, I was too deep to back out now, so I might as well properly dig up my grave so someone could shoot me and shove me in easier. From what I've seen and know about your people, you don't use warp, so this kind of technology should not pose a danger to you. In fact, its spread far and wide would only weaken our mutual enemies. Chaos and Eldar Primary, and anything that fucks those bastards over is a good thing in my book, especially if we can make it stick. I spoke with unexpected passion. The Necron continued to stare at me, while disturbed murmurs echoed from the people surrounding us. The less said about the rapid-fire chattering of binary, the better. You speak sense, the Necron eventually uttered. From the analysis of your available equipment, the odds of you humans being able to produce the pylon technology are slim. We'll search our archives for older versions of the plans, and time permitting, we might be able to offer a dumbed-down variant you might be able to construct and use. The Necron said calmly. If this alliance pans out in the long run, we might consider sharing basic weapon and armor designs as well. The Necrons left with those parting words, the crowd hastily parting before them. Soon we could hear the distinct cracking sound of their teleportation. Well, that went better than I feared. I muttered aloud and rubbed my damp neck. Inquisitor Vale, may we have a word in private? General Alexander inquired in a voice that made it clear that he wasn't asking for permission. Yes, we need to speak. Captain Toole nodded while staring at me with cold, empty eyes. Fuck my life. So much for my inquisitorial authority being a shield. As if those two weren't bad enough, the AdMech chattering rose in intensity. All non-essential personnel, clear the building. You have duties to attend to. The general snapped in a voice of command that got everyone scrambling to get out of his sight. Within moments, it was just the four of us, Lucas Alexander, Davian Thula, and my shadow Antaeus. Our Mechanicus friends are going to be trouble. The Bloodraven's captain spoke softly in a rumbling voice that nevertheless carried clearly through the briefing room. After this stunt, General Alexander waved at me. I'm surprised they left peacefully. I half expected either open combat or someone taking a swing at the Inquisitor, which brings me to my primary concern. Lord Inquisitor Vale, what in the Emperor's name did you think you were doing? There's cutting a deal with a Xeno, which is almost always a heresy that gets you shot, but this, implying that our technology is inferior to that of aliens. Which is, by the way, true in this case, I pointed out, earning myself a glare that no one would dare level at a proper established Inquisitor. I'm not joking. Anyone who has paid attention and has access to the relevant knowledge would be very well aware that technologically we've at best slid back a bit from the height of the Crusade. While that glorious era was a golden age for humanity, it was never able to fully restore the height of technological progress our species enjoyed during the dark age of technology. I snapped, not knowing what the hell came over me. That's a statement that can get people shot for heresy, especially if the local Mechanicus contingent has any say in it. Captain Thule pointed out with a hint of amusement in his voice. Don't get me started on those toaster fuckers, I snapped back before I could think about what I was saying. That in turn earned me 3 stunned looks, followed by a slow chuckle that had more in common with gravel ground under a tank's threads than a sound of mirth which came from Antaeus. It's not like anything the Inquisitor said was a lie. That's not really the point. Captain Thule glared at his chief librarian. Those are the kind of words the Inquisition shoots people over after putting them to question. The way I see it, barring a miracle, that's my best-case scenario after the mess on Cronus is resolved, so in that case, I might just do my best for us in particular and the Imperium in general before my time is up. I shrugged. It wasn't a pleasant thought, but I had to be a realist. Besides, the odds of actually living long enough for our reinforcements and proper Inquisitors to become an issue was a long shot anyway. That's not helping, Inquisitor. General Alexander shook his head. It's what it is. Gaining access to technology that weakens warp-related phenomena, especially if the Imperium at large could reproduce it reliably. That's worth all our lives and more. I can't say that I disagree. However, you could have put it in a more diplomatic manner, Inquisitor. Captain Thule chided me. If I had any actual experience as an Inquisitor, not to mention years of training as part of the retinue of a proper Inquisitor, things might be different. I pointed out. As things stand, I'm doing the best I can and hoping it would be enough. You know, we tend to forget that you arrived as a wet-behind-the-ears acolyte, and in many respects, you still are one. Antius spoke softly. However, you're still an Inquisitor, even though once we re-establish contact with the Imperium at large, some parties might disagree. Your words do carry a lot of weight, Inquisitor Vale. I certainly hope so. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stopped shooting at each other, doing the enemy's job for them. Speaking about consequences, that particular fuck-up will be looked into, provided we all don't get killed first. I have no doubt about it. Antius nodded, while Thule and Alexander did have the good grace to look chagrined. Speaking about consequences, I would request that you address the assembled troops tomorrow morning about our alliance with the Xeno and what you said tonight. The last thing we need is rampant rumors forcing the commissars to shoot more people than they have to. However, first I need you to deal with the fire you lit up concerning our Adeptus Mechanicus contingent, and do it peacefully. We need them doing their jobs, not arguing about the merits of alien technology. I'll see to it the moment this meeting is concluded. I forced down the instinctive reaction of straightening up like a board and saluting the general. Part 6. Victory Bay. Cronus. Usually feeling happy because your immediate superior, his own superiors, and everyone above you in the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy on the planet suffered a sudden and very much fatal case of death, wasn't a nice thing, much less a good thing. Usually that is. In this particular case, Magos Scipio Rho 11 begged to disagree about any such sentiments, considering the circumstances. His late and generally not lamented superiors were all rather conservative, and as if that wasn't enough of a personal failing, they enjoyed broad support among the rank and file of Mechanicus adepts on Cronus. Considering the deals Inquisitor Vale already had in place with the Necrons, said conservative elements were going to be a big problem, even without official support from their superiors. In fact, they already were, with Scipio Rho 11 having to all but shout down some of his colleagues right in front of General Alexander and the Inquisitor, not to mention the aliens. To be fair, he had to shout down some of his own allies too, who practically demanded schematics and working prototypes for study from the Necrons, which was a potential sticking point, one that thankfully the Xeno chose to ignore, because if anyone unaugmented could understand binary in that meeting, it was those aliens. The Inquisitor's lack of tact didn't help matters. Really, it was no news, no grand revelation that the Imperium had stagnated or even regressed technologically in places, especially when compared to the heights of the hallowed dark age of technology. Any aspiring Mechanicus adept, with 2 brain cells available to rub together, could such correct conclusion with data freely available on almost all civilized Imperial worlds. That by itself was not in contention. Usually, it was simply a regrettable fact. However, said fact wasn't something people tended to comment on or discuss in public, much less in front of high-ranked Imperial officials, or worse, aliens, even if everyone in the room likely knew or suspected the truth anyway. It was simply not the done thing, and more ammo for the Inquisitors and, more importantly, Progress's enemies to use. This was a case of faulty parts Scipio Rho 11 didn't need at a time like this. "This is heresy," one of the loudest conservative adepts proclaimed aloud, his shrill mechanical voice whistling through the air like a whip. The only saving grace was that the extensively augmented old cyborg kept on speaking binary. The number of resigned or worse, angry agreements that met the sentiment were less than heartening. But of course, the more forward-thinking, or simply saner, adepts hurried to oppose their counterparts, loudly proclaiming how Inquisitor Vale was doing the Omnissiah's work. Naturally, that didn't go down very well, and Scipio Row 11 had to speak aloud, voicing as much disappointment as his augmented throat could produce. By the motive force, this was going to get ugly much sooner than he feared. Fellow servants of the Great Cog, is this how we show ourselves to the Imperium at large? He snapped as if speaking to small children, using simple and easy-to-understand words for all the good it was going to do. This is a travesty. Magos, Scipio Row 11, and I for one won't stand for it. That same cyborg declared heatedly. Any and all studying of diseased xenotech must only be done so we could properly annihilate it faster, easier, and if practical, safer. To even entertain the thought that we would study abominable xenotechnology with the goal of reproducing it, and thus sullying the hallowed knowledge the Omnissiah granted us. It's preposterous, I say. A concerning amount of the present adepts nodded in agreement, while the others glared at Sulla Alpha 5 and his cronies as if they just crawled out of a dark Mechanicus lab. Perhaps some great orator or a magus more experienced in the politics of their organizations might have found a way to diffuse the situation instead of merely doing their best to stave off an inevitable explosion. Scipio Row 11 was neither of those things. Instead, he preferred the company of war machines he tinkered with and the feedback of the soldiers using it to the words of most of his Adeptus Mechanicus colleagues. That's not for us to decide, Scipio Row 11 snapped back. I can see where you and your supporters are coming from, and certain precedents and policies do support your view, he grudgingly admitted. Other precedents, policies, and the mandates of the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition does support Inquisitor Vale's actions, barring sanction from higher authority, which isn't currently present on Cronus. The final disposition of any captured, recovered, or diplomatically acquired technology and schematics won't be decided by any of us, but proper high-ranked Adeptus Mechanicus Magi and experienced Inquisitors. Now what we need to do is our best to ensure that Cronus doesn't fall to chaos before reinforcements could arrive and solve the issue we're having. We have a tremendous amount of equipment to fix, so let's get to it. He did his best, including pulling rank, yet all he could manage was getting everyone to go busy themselves, fixing everything the recent fighting broke, while quietly, or not so quietly, fuming at the situation they found themselves in. At least the noises concerning a possible heresy subdued. Instead, now Scipio Row 11 had to deal with his own supporters, who clamored to be among the first to study the interesting Necron technology acquired by the Inquisitor. Why was he even bothering at this point? There were vehicles to fix and machine spirits to placate, Omnissiah damn it. Near the Farseer chambers, Craft World Ulthwi. There were days that Rohan almost regretted leaving the craft world he was born on and ending up on Ulthwi. Well, to be fair, he didn't regret getting out of Bealtan and the insanity gripping it. Merely the facts that he had to leave his young and stubborn foolish sister behind and the place he ended up in the end. The war-crazy Farseers and other leaders of his former home were bad enough. Those running Ulthwi, while not exactly worse, you had to be either Drukhari or She Who Thirsts worshipper for that, were too impressed with their prophecies and diving into the ocean of souls to seek them. 10,000 years since the fall, and his people hadn't really learned. Nevertheless, Rohan really wasn't one to talk. He did follow the prophecy-obsessed Farseers, didn't he? It was one of the preconditions of being accepted into his new home, even if the nonsense that came as consequence were often trying. He was once again pondering the unlikely chain of events that brought him to Ulthwi in the first place, and how likely it was to have been manipulated by Farseers, when the intricate doors leading into the Farseer chamber opened and the High Farseer himself, Eldrad Ulthwan, staggered out leaning on his staff. Blood stained his splendid purple robes, and he held a piece of torn cloth in his left hand, pushing it against his bleeding nose. The Farseer's eyes were bloodshot, and his shoulders were slumped, his figure radiating bone-deep weariness. The Black Guardian party, standing as an honor guard in front of the chamber, looked between each other and Eldrad. then glanced within the open door, where the rest of the Farseer Council sat in their seats in no better condition, and called for medical assistance. Eldrad's far-off gaze snapped out, and he looked at the ranger. "Ah, Rohan, good man." The ancient Eldari forced a smile, revealing blood-stained teeth. "There are some complications we need to deal with, and some of them concern your former home." Eldrad's words came out with a bit of a slur, further proving that whatever happened in the sealed and shielded chamber wasn't good at all. "You don't say. What did you do this time?" Rohan bluntly asked. "For that matter, what did those crazies did as well?" "We've done nothing but glimpse the future, and it's changed." Eldrad sighed, and for a moment he did look his age. An ancient and deadly tired man, instead of the energetic figure who led Ulthuan through 10,000 years of strife. All the futures have, and not for the better. "Never sufficiently damned prophecies," Rohan whispered with a gloomy shake of his head. "What do you want from me, High Farseer?" "Your sister is on the world of Cronus, the tomb world of Cronus," Eldrad began. He removed the cloth of his face, frowned when his nose kept bleeding, and pressed it back in. "I don't know what their Farseers had seen, if anything beyond what they wanted to see. Taldir managed to do the unthinkable. She forced the local human forces and the awakening Necrons into an alliance, and potentially burned what little goodwill our species have with the upstart Tau, all in one fell swoop." Eldrad explained, with more than a hint of exasperation snaking into his tired voice. Rohan closed his eyes and did his best to retain his composure. Bieltan's endless crusade to restore the dead and damned Eldari Empire leading to something like that. It sounded terribly in character. His young sister being entangled into such a mess, he could see it, even though he didn't want to believe it. "What do you intend to do about it? What do you want me to do? You didn't call me to gloat, neither to merely inform me of the newest disaster." Rohan concluded, "Damage mitigation. The future is not what it was supposed to be. The enemy is moving to counter us, and barring a miracle, our plans for long-term salvation are now moot. We're going to need allies and all the help we could get in order to survive. Bieltan just turned from an occasionally useful liability into a noose around all our necks, one that might just drag us all into eternal damnation. No matter how exhausted we Farseers are, we should be able to force a webway connection to Cronus and send a war party there. You won't have Farseer support on this one." Eldrad grimaced and leaned onto his staff in an uncharacteristic display of weakness. "Your orders are simple: aid the humans, neutralize the chaos presence on the planet, and investigate the extent of the alliance between the Necrons and the humans there." The High Farseer fixed Rohan with an intense stare. "Under no circumstances you're to show Ulthui's forces as hostile either to the humans or the Necrons' presence on that planet. Bieltan already ensured chaos might very well win there, and convinced those two factions that some Eldari are all but allied with the abominations. In other words, the situation is even more fucked than if the Drukhari did it, and you need me to make it unfucked." Rohan put it crudely and bluntly. "What could possibly go wrong beyond everything, really? Damn it, Taldir." "Yes," Eldrad nodded.